In a lot of my video essays, I've discussed my struggle with indifference and its effects on who I am as a person. However, I've only briefly touched on one of the biggest consequences of that indifference that still affects me at present. Not only had I become extremely indifferent, but I had also become extremely cynical. I have since overcome my extreme cynicism, but I've still retained a lot of it within my personality and embraced it as a part of who I am. There's a clear difference between simply being cynical and being spiteful. Cynicism is okay in moderation, but I let my cynicism blossom freely until it became loathing of the world, rather than just cynicism or realism. Even so, I still labeled that loathing as cynicism. Whether I did that to convince myself that it wasn't spite, or because I actually believe that to be the case, I am not sure. In either my sophomore or freshman year of high school, a girl was surveying some of her friends with a series of in-depth questions. It wasn't quite a survey, it was more like a collection of perspectives on philosophy. I decided I would be the one to not give her the superficial answers that I believed everyone else was giving her. One of the questions was, how can you know if someone truly cares? Although I still firmly believe in the basis of my answer to this question, my answer was still very cynical. I told her that there was no possible way for you to be 100% sure that someone actually cares. I also told her that people are often fueled by ulterior motives of their own selfish benefit, but I don't believe that to be the case now. Another one of the questions was, what is unconditional love to you? My answer was, unconditional love does not exist. I was truly under the belief that there was no such thing as unconditional love, which to my current self is an incomprehensible belief. Another place where my cynicism was overwhelmingly present was in my written essays, specifically the ones I wrote in the latter half of my senior year. At that time, I was gradually realizing that my cynicism was an issue. In a way, these excerpts are my own forms of Hachiman's philosophical monologues. In an essay titled Cynicism, the Influential Monster, I wrote, although the effects of cynicism are atrocious, ending cynicism will not solve the issue. Cynicism and depression are horrific forms of emotional suffering that one can endure, and the effects of them will not dissipate over time. The aftermath of the rise in cynicism will remain as a scar on global culture for years to come. Even if the rise in cynicism is completely severed and the generational gap is bridged, the adolescence will still feel its consequential suffering for life. This excerpt is not unlike Hachiman's cynical ideology that everything is society's fault. In an essay titled Moths to a Flame, I wrote, if someone has the capability to commit an atrocity after viewing one that affected themselves, they will instinctively commit an atrocity in response. Bystanders instinctively run away or choose to accept atrocities as something they cannot control, regardless of their capability to act against or for an atrocity. Atrocity after atrocity leads to further atrocities, creating an unavoidable domino effect. As a result, humans appear to be attracted to atrocities as much as moths are to a flame. This excerpt speaks for itself. I was so cynical that I was under the impression that committing atrocity was a part of human instinct. In an essay titled Corrupt Obedience, I wrote, it's often considered whether or not the authority is corrupt or not, when in reality the obeyers could be just as corrupt in many different ways. The statement in this excerpt is not something I completely disagree with, although the very idea of the essay itself was cynical. There are plenty more of my essays that I could quote. I mean, I even named one, False Hope for Today, No Hope for Tomorrow, which in of itself is a very cynical title. But I think I've made my point. Hachiman and I are very similar in regards to our cynicism and spite towards the world and society as a whole. In my cynicism, I pushed people away. Relationships were pointless to me due to the combination of my cynicism and my indifference. I was friendly with nearly everyone, but I only considered a very select few people more than acquaintances, and even then those relationships were very superficial compared to the ones I have with those people today. It didn't only cause me to avoid establishing friendships. I was apprehensive of becoming close friends with people, but I was especially apprehensive of love. I couldn't bring myself to be attached to anyone in that way. I still felt obligated and pressured to feel that way, so I forced it. I thought my inability to become attached to people was purely due to my own emotional issues, but it turned out that I truly hadn't found the right person. In the first part of this video essay series, I referenced a girl I met at the end of my senior year and how my attachment to her intoxicated me. Due to her, I don't value romance, and likely won't anytime soon. I value a lot more things in my life, far more than I do romance. With that being the case, I'm not completely closed off to the idea of someone changing those values. I'm just not actively looking for someone like that. Despite my first negative experience with love, I came out of it with a stronger grasp on my life, aspirations, and emotions. Realizing that I had the capability to feel those emotions through that girl gave me a new lens through which to view life. I finally understood that interpersonal connections were necessary and that I was capable of developing them, no matter how cynical I was. With that, I was able to break free of my crippling cynicism and view everything with a freshly bright lens. Love may have intoxicated me temporarily, but it has permanently sobered me. In Oregaru, Hachiman started out as an extremely cynical character. He experienced crippling cynicism, and worst of all, he blamed it on society. Instead of acknowledging his extreme cynicism as a flaw, he simply accepted it as a part of who he was, and relied mostly on trusting no one but himself. It wasn't until he was forced to join the service club and met two wonderful girls named Yui and Yukino that he gradually was able to rely on another person. His self-sacrificing method of fixing problems was not only a result of his cynicism, but it also became an issue when more people began to become a part of his life. It had worked all his life while he had been alone, but now that Yui and Yukino were there, his selfish actions weren't just affecting him. When Yui and Yukino indicated that his actions were selfish, Hachiman decided to change himself. The three of them began to rely on each other more and more, and Hachiman was eventually able to uncover a desire that had been hidden deep within himself through all the time that he had been alone. His desire for genuineness in a relationship. There was some conflict that resulted from Hachiman's struggle to find that genuineness, including him mislabeling his love for his friends as codependence, but in the end he was able to find that genuineness. He found that genuineness not only in the friendships he had developed, but primarily in the love he had developed for Yukino. Yukino reciprocated his feelings, and they were both able to understand each other on a level deeper than anyone else they had ever known in their lives. Through their love, they were sobered, and were able to overcome cynicism. I related a lot to Hachiman's struggle. As I mentioned earlier, my essays were strangely like his cynical monologues. I was, for most of my life, a cynical person. It wasn't until I found love, as negative as that experience was, that I was able to break free of that cynicism. Through my friendships and through that love, I was able to find my place in life, just like Hachiman. Hachiman and I both still retain some cynicism, although most of it filters into realism and practicality. Similarly to how Hachiman acts in the final episode of Season 3, when I look back at my cynical self, I find it cringeworthy. I'm not saying that cynicism we share is necessarily a bad thing. Again, it's okay in moderation. My cynicism is the foundation for my wit and sarcastic personality, and it's also the foundation for a lot of my friendships. I have one particular group of friends who all share my moderated cynicism. We all have that in common, and that's why we have such deep bonds. Even if we are all cynical, we don't let that cynicism control us. The only reason I can say that today is because of all of my experiences in the past, the positive and the negative. Love is complicated. This is the fourth and final episode in a video essay series all about love, but I'm still far from having covered every theme there is to discuss. I've discussed how Rent-a-Girlfriend portrays love's intoxication, how Bloom Into You regarding Saeki Sayaka illustrates the pursuit of love, how Tamako Love Story shows the method of finding love through patience, and how Oregaru demonstrates love's sobriety. Even with the end of this series, there is so much to cover on the subject of love that I doubt this will be my final essay on it. This may be the last entry in the Talks of Love series, but it will certainly not be the last time I talk of love.